there's one way of looking at struggling with eating choices that is to look at it through the lens, through a classical lens of addiction. And if you were to look through it through a classical lens of addiction, then the notion would be that one little mistake is just a catastrophe. And the thing about that is that that would be an improper way of looking at the problem. In other words, you could say that there are similarities because we know that there are. So if you processed food is going to be very stimulating of dopamine production. So the more pleasurable it is, the more dopamine, et cetera. And that is the same thing as what's going on with cocaine. But that doesn't mean that cocaine and a piece of toast with butter on it is the same thing. It's not even remotely the same thing. So the fact that when you eat food, you can get a dopamine rush. You're supposed to have a dopamine rush, for goodness sakes. Okay, so the only question is sort of how much, and if it's exaggerated too much, does this draw you into an addictive-like process? Well, I think that we know that it sort of can, but it won't necessarily, in the sense that of all the people for the last 30 years that I've coached in and around the McDougall program, the vast majority of the people that have ever gotten any benefit from this have not been perfectionists at all. So I see it with my own eyes that a great many people will come in 50 pounds overweight, and a year later they're 30 pounds overweight or 20 pounds overweight. In other words, they have not done everything perfectly and they have not lost all their excess weight, but they have made substantial progress. And so that is very typical. So looking at this as an all or none issue is it's an interesting lens to do it. And there is value in going very clean for a period of time, as you're doing here for a few weeks, something like this. There's value in that, in the sense that sometimes it's a tremendous educational process to find out that your palate actually has within it the capacity to find really healthy food very satisfying, just as it is found in nature. So that's a lot of people don't know that. They've never experienced it. It's like never having been on a roller coaster. You don't know what it's like, and you don't know what it's like to actually have a clean palate. So it isn't that it isn't worth doing. It could be worth doing for a lot of reasons, but it's not worth doing for the notion that this is the first day that I burned the boats and I'm never going back, and the only way for me to succeed and go forward is to be perfect for the rest of my life. That is a ludicrous notion, and it's one that we should be fully aware that the bar is too high, unless we choose to make it the bar. If you choose to make it the bar, great. But if you do, you are not one of the rare ones that will succeed. Most people that will have substantial success will not put the bar that high. So that's how I look at that. Okay, so I can tell you, I was talking to a man yesterday who is, he's 120 pounds overweight and a young guy, and so remarkably interested in getting this problem solved early. And so he was wanting to have rules and expectations, and I just said, no, I'm not interested in rules and expectations. I'm going to tell you the only thing that you need to know. Right? The only thing that you need to know is that if you eat 1,000 pounds of wet starch in the next year, you will be thinner than you are now. Okay? If you do not eat 1,000 pounds of wet starch in the next year, you're going to look pretty much the way you look now. So that's all I care about, is the fact that he needs to go eat 3 pounds of wet starch a day for the rest of his life. And uh, the whole point here is that it doesn't matter when we get there. Your weight is an equilibrium of really three variables: your genetics, your diet, and your exercise level. So those are the three variables, and only one of them is a variable within your life, which is your diet and your exercise level. Your genes are fixed to you. So however, they're a major variable in determining what this problem looks like for you. So if you have medium genes, then you got a medium level problem. If you've got very thick genes, you've got a thick problem. And if you've got skinny genes, you've got no problem at all with respect to excess weight. So but that's all I care about. Because I care about when I look at somebody's weight situation, I kind of want to know those things. I want to know, I can tell their genes by asking them. I don't need to know about their family. All I need to know about is their history. So if someone's been over 100 pounds overweight, I already know they've got very thick genes. They're already in the top 10 percentile for essentially efficiency of storing fat. And then if they say, well, I was on the McDougall program and I lost 50 pounds and then I'm still 50 pounds overweight. It's like, okay, you've reached equilibrium. And that's all. So all that told me is that your diet and your exercise behavior reached equilibrium. So that's all that happened. And then that's where we've landed. And they're like, well, I don't see anything I'm doing wrong. It's like, well, all depends on what we want to call it at that point. But there is something that we can do to change you off of that equilibrium, because you're not biologically determined to be 50 pounds overweight. That is an unnatural state of affairs. And therefore, what we need to do is we need to determine what it is that equilibrium, what are we willing to shift? So an important way that I look at this, Gustavo, is I want to find out what people are willing to do that is better than what they're doing now. That's what I want to know. Okay. And whatever that is, that's what we're going to go for. We're not going to say, well, okay, I desperately want to be completely rail thin and super, super svelte. It's like, okay, well, I know how to do that. And that is what we're going to eat nothing but whole natural foods, completely unprocessed. You're going to get up in the morning and you're going to get a 45-minute workout in the morning and a 45-minute workout, in the afternoon. And this is what you're going to eat. You're going to eat a huge salad, a bunch of steamed vegetables, some fruit, and a couple of starches. And that's that. And you're going to do that for the rest of your life with no exceptions. It's like, well, do you want to do that? Because if you really want to be, very low fat content on your body, we can get you there. I don't care if you're 427 pounds. I can get you there, but it's only 1 in 10,000 people that is willing to have such a regimen. And I have a feeling that you're not one of those 1 in 10,000. So maybe we should ask of what it is that you're doing now, what you would be willing to change. And then we're going to go see if you can change that. And we're going to work at that for a while. And if we make that change, then we're going to sit back and watch it for a year, for example, and see until we hit equilibrium. Okay, so this young man basically has been fiddling around at 315 pounds. And he fiddles around and he loses a couple pounds from getting clean. And then he comes back and goes back, just as you'd expect, as his brain is wrestling with the cost-benefit analysis of how clean to live. And my response is, well, if you're ever going to be anything that isn't going to look like 315 pounds, you will need to be eating 3 pounds of wet starches a day, no matter what else you do. If you're eating some ribs now and then, if you're eating some cupcakes now and then, those are extraneous details of interest later. But the thing that's critically important is, are you going to be eating 3 pounds of wet starches a day? Because if you don't do that, I know for sure what will be replacing it. Okay. I know that what we'll be replacing, if you only eat 2 pounds of wet starch a day, then I know that the third pound is not going to be salad and fruit. I know that the third pound is going to be vegan pizza, chicken wings, peanut butter sandwiches. In other words, it's going to be something that is not a whole natural food. It's going to be something that's going to be very, very rich. It's going to be vastly higher in calorie density than the wet starches that I'm telling you that need to be there. It's going to be 1,500 calorie pound food instead of 500 calorie pound food. And you're going to be eating an extra 1,000 calories a day as a result of that. And that's how you're going to maintain that 315 pounds. So that is what the discussion needs to focus on. What is the difference between what you're doing now and what it is that you're willing to do? What is the most obvious thing that you are willing to make a change on? And then we make that change and then we watch it very carefully. So let me give you an example to follow up your question that is super important. So let's suppose I have somebody that's was a conventional eater and was 100 pounds overweight, went to a McDougall diet, lost 50 pounds, and there they sit. And they've been sitting there for a year and a half frustrated. And they're like, well, my friends tell me keto is better. And, what should I do? Okay. What I would do is I'd say, okay, now let's look at the next thing on the list that you're doing. And let's find out what's the next thing that you are willing to make a change on. Okay. So let's suppose person doesn't do any exercise at all. And I'm going to say, okay, your diet's a little rich. We're going to, but you're not sure you're willing to make any, you feel hesitant that you might not be willing to make any significant changes there. Okay. So, but you're not doing any exercise at all. Okay. So now we're going to have you walk around your block once a night. That's what we're going to do. You think you could do that? Yes, I could. I could do that. That wouldn't be too bad. My knees are okay. All right. So now we're going to do that. And we're going to do that for the next 4 months. And we're going to see whether or not that makes any difference in your weight. Now, why would we run the experiment for that long? Because after all, when the person would change to the McDougall program, they lost 4 pounds a month. And they're like, hey, shouldn't I be losing? It's like, well, no, you've reached equilibrium. And so now we're going to make a change in what it is that you're doing day to day. And we might lose maybe a pound a month. So in 4 months, we might be able to detect a 4-pound weight loss. And so that's our experiment. We're just going to make that change. It's a change that you're willing to do forever anyway. And let's see whether or not that will cause us to experience a 4-pound weight loss in the next 4 months. If it does, great. Then we don't have to change anything else. We're on our way. We're down to 46 pounds. We may be in 2 years, we may drop 25 pounds and you may be happy with it. But if 4 months from now we haven't dropped any weight at all, then we're going to have to change something else. Okay. The amount of, hold on one second. The amount of weight that people are going to lose has to do with how much have any of the variables changed. So the genes haven't changed. How much has the diet changed? How much has the exercise level changed? A lot of times the exercise level doesn't change that much. So now the question is, how much has the diet changed? Well, if the diet has changed from 1,000 calories a pound to 700, that is a tremendous change. So that's a conventional diet down to a standard McDougall diet, maybe down in that range. Okay, that's good. Now, what if we go from a standard McDougall diet down to an ultimate weight loss diet? Well, we've probably gone down from 700 to 600 calories a pound. Gotten rid of a few nuts, a few avocado, a little bit of whole wheat bread, maybe some pasta. But we're still eating the same potatoes, rice, and beans. We're still eating the fruit. We're still eating vegetables, and we're still eating salad. So it hasn't changed that much, but it's changed maybe 100 calories a pound. So now what would we expect the rate of change to be? Very slow. So since the change has been subtle, the change in your body should be subtle. And the change in your body might take, for example, a year. So maybe that difference might cost us 15 pounds permanently of weight loss, but it's going to take a year for it to show up. So it's only going to be a pound and change a month. And so that's why after 6 weeks, when you've only lost 1 pound, you're like, well, it doesn't even make any difference. It's not working. Oh no, you can't tell yet. Okay, so we have to understand that subtle dietary changes will result in subtle bodily composition changes. Dramatic dietary changes will result in dramatic body composition changes. You have to know how big the dietary change is relative to your overall calorie density of your diet in order to anticipate how much weight might be lost. In the final year of her weight loss, Chef AJ was losing about a pound a month. Okay, so that's it. So she's going to lose about 3 pounds a month for the first year and lose about a pound a month for the next year. So that's how that goes down. That's how that works. All right.
Yeah,
hopefully that's helpful.
that's really good, Dr. Lyle, because so many people want to be losing 10 pounds a month for for a whole year. It's like it takes time.
Yeah, there are people that will. So
Yeah,
I've had many
yes,
people that were 100 or 150 pounds overweight,
yes,
and they weren't necessarily genetically as bad off as you would have thought. Their diets were horrendous. So they were an extra 100 pounds overweight, but they earned every pound of that through, chocolate cheesecake and greasy pepperoni pizza.
all right,
So their diets were extremely rich. And when they shifted to a good diet, they started dumping weight like crazy because
right,
it turned out their genes really weren't they weren't at the 99th percentile genetically. They were only at the 85th percentile genetically.
right,
And so as we got a decent diet, they actually did lose weight at that rate. But
yes,
that's rare. I mean,
right.
I would say for people that are 100 pounds overweight, that isn't rare. It's just uncommon.
Hmm.
More likely, you're going to lose 4 or 5 pounds a month.
Right.
It might take
I
you
was
2 years to dump 100 pounds. Yeah.
I at the beginning, when I had about 100 or 90 pounds to lose, I was losing 8 pounds a month for a good 4 or 5 months. I was doing that, and then I started to reach equilibrium, like you say.
Yes.
And,
Yes.
you have to start, either have a coach or someone to help you, or you yourself figure out, okay, now what can I change? So I
Yeah.
started taking out a few things that now I really didn't care for anymore, because my way of eating had changed, and so it was easier to give up bread, let's say, than it should have been at the very beginning,
Right.
or nuts and seeds, things like that.
Right.
But
Yeah.
would you
Okay.
just, yeah, would you, for clarification for some people here, define what a wet starch is?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I'm apparently the only person using the term. It's frustrating.
It's good. It's
Yeah.
a good term. I
Yeah.
like it.
Wet starch is going to be things like rice, beans, potatoes. So you don't eat rice dry.
Right.
You could eat it once it's cooked, and then you have a rice cake, and now you're eating a dry starch. Okay. But if you eat a bowl of rice, that's wet. There's water inside of it. Oatmeal is going to be wet unless you have an oatmeal bar. Now it's been dried out.
Right.
So, in other words, starches, typically we're going to cook them in water, rice, beans, and potatoes. So a bunch of dried beans. You can't eat dried beans. You're going to have to cook them. They're going to have to be, and the cooking process breaks down the starch molecule. It's called gelatinizes it. That's when it pulls in a bunch of water and expands. It's way bigger. Spaghetti, for example, is a wet starch. The bread is a dried starch. So bread and spaghetti are the same biochemically, but they are different in the sense that the spaghetti is wet and the bread is dry. So bread is this very same material there. The bread is about 1,600 calories a pound. The spaghetti is 900. Big difference. Okay. Your ancestors, your digestive system is designed by nature around wet starches. You can tell that we can tell that we're a big starch eater by how many genes we have for the code for the manufacture of amylase, which is the enzyme that breaks down starch. So I think we have 28 genes or something like that. It's a lot of genes. Clearly a big starch
Yeah,
eater. Now,
right.
now we're designed by nature to be hunters and gatherers as well. So the vegan folks who think that we are genetically designed to be herbivores are incorrect. It's not true. I believe that we are better off health-wise being an herbivore, but 50,000 years ago, um, the animal food was an important resource to have between you and starvation, for goodness sakes. And so human beings are designed to eat this and like it, and but it is in fact a problematic food that's associated with long-term chronic disease processes later in life. So I have no, not to mention, I mean, animal rights is a whole different issue.
Right.
But the point is that from the standpoint of ideal health, I believe the evidence is pretty strongly on the scale of a vegan diet being just outstanding and probably ideal.
Right.
So however, that vegan diet would have been averaging, I mean, a natural foods diet of our natural history would have averaged somewhere in the general ranges of 500 to 700 calories a pound.
Mm.
You can tell this, an average guy is going to eat about 4 pounds of food a day, and he's going to eat about 2,500 calories. We know this. You can measure this in everybody's urine. You know exactly how many calories they're eating or how many calories they're burning.
Right. Yeah.
And so that would be about 625 calories a pound, for example.
Right.
So there is no exact number, but if people's diets got under 500 calories a pound, those were getting pretty lean.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. If they got over 700 calories a pound, they were sitting in some very high cotton. Those were unusually good circumstances. So the major foods that they were eating would have averaged, call it 600. So if we look at some major constituencies of the human diet, we're going to find that certainly people got fruit when they could, which is 300. Vegetables were important. Those were 200. Salad vegetables, they're only going to grab a handful of that. That's not that important, but that would only be 100 calories a pound. So what they were going to eat is, quote, meat and potatoes. So the animal food would be 800, and the starches are going to be somewhere around 400 or 500. So potatoes are 375, beans are 400, rice is 500. You're going to expect a huge component of the diet is going to be coming from the wet starches. Now, they could eat some dry starch, and so they could have some rough-looking bread that they've cooked it and then they've eaten it dry, because now at dry it's up there at 1,500 calories a pound. So it becomes a very rich facsimile for meat, but they probably didn't do a lot of that. They probably got their average calorie density up by eating honey, as well as occasional nuts and seeds. So this is where it is that a diet that's super clean, that doesn't have anything north of rice, is a diet that's unnaturally lean. It's unnaturally thin. And so it could be a very good diet, but the problem is that people that eat such a diet are always riding on the ragged edge of starvation. In other words, and very often if people will do this dutifully and thinking that this is the way to, quote, live, if they do this, after 6 weeks, they can get ravenously frustrated, and pretty soon they're eating a box of donuts. Okay. Or very commonly, they've got their big spoon in a peanut butter jar. Okay. So these are the kinds of problems that come up when you get the diet overly lean, more so than would have been consistent with natural history. That's why I want people to not be so extremely fastidious at just, but wet starches still need to be the center. They need to be the biggest thing that you're eating physically. They are, so if you're a typical person, ought to be looking to eat on the order of 3 pounds of wet starches a day, i.e. rice, beans, and potatoes. Rice, beans, potatoes, pasta, oatmeal. Those are things like that that they're averaging about 400 calories a pound. So 3 pounds of it is going to take you to 1,200 calories. If you're an average woman, you're going to eat about 2,000 calories a day. So we've now covered all but 800. So now we have a pound of fruit at 300 and a pound or two of vegetables at a couple hundred and some salad. And now we're still awfully lean there. And that's why we have room for some things that are a little bit richer that essentially make your diet more interesting. Pasta, for example, is 900 calories a pound in its wet noodle form. However, you don't eat straight pasta. Hopefully you eat it with tomato sauce, which is only 200 something calories a pound. So when you put those together, it's about 600 calories a pound. That's fine, okay? Hopefully if you eat a salad, maybe you put a half an avocado on it. Avocado is 900 calories a pound. The rest of the salad is 100 calories a pound. And some other things you put on it, beets or kidney beans or 200 or 300 calories a pound. But the avocado is not going to massively increase the calorie density of that salad. But what it does is it actually feeds the animal a little bit of what it is that it's looking for, which is something that looks sort of like meat. And meat would have been 800 calories a pound, avocado at 900. They are effectively very close facsimiles, okay? Tofu, if anybody likes it for anything, is an interesting material that is about 500 calories a pound. So it's on the rich side of the starches, but it's relatively high in fat. So it essentially becomes a pretty good facsimile for meat, even though it's down at 500 calories a pound. So these are the types of things that, in other words, I'm not looking to be eating fruit, salad, steamed vegetables, and wet starches. If you do that exclusively, you're going to be averaging about 400 calories a pound or 300 calories a pound, probably more like 300, which means that you're going to be eating 7 pounds of food a day of exceedingly low fat content. And you will probably, if you actually did that, you would get rail thin. And if women did that, most of them would lose their menstrual cycle. In other words, this is, it can be done, and you can actually eat enough because you don't have to go get it because you can get it at a store. You can actually eat such a diet, and it's a very healthy diet, but it is not the diet that mimics well your natural history. And so your internal process will be one of constant chronic caloric frustration, okay? And constantly being lured by higher density calories that you think are naughty, but the truth is are absolutely consistent with your natural history of spiking your diet with occasionally higher calorie density foods. So, so it makes a difference. In other words, I'd rather be spiking my diet with avocado and pasta than with peanut butter sandwiches. Because a peanut butter sandwich, which is a very benign looking thing and perfectly fine health-wise, but from the standpoint of weight, think about what that is. Peanut butter is way unnatural food up there at 3,000 calories a pound. The bread is 1,600. You put honey on it, which is 1,800. That peanut butter sandwich is about 2,400 calories a pound, which makes it 3 times the calorie density of steak. Okay, so this is where it is that very many vegans' dietary programs hit the wall because they get actually overly ambitious in thinking that they need to be eating everything, quote, left of the red line. In other words, everything less than 500 calories a pound. And the truth of the matter is, no, 500 or 600 or 700 calories a pound was the average, not the top of what our ancestors ate. So I want people to be aiming at around 600 calories a pound just conceptually, which means that you're going to have some things that are richer than 600 calories a pound. You're going to have some pasta, you're going to have some avocado. You will occasionally have some dried carbohydrate if you're not going to have any animal food, which I think is a good idea. So that's why we don't have to be perfect. We want to be aiming in this range of 600 calories a pound. that should be highly sustainable psychologically, okay, in a way that 400 calories a pound is not. And so my attitude is, let's go find out what happens to you when we aim there. Now we're going to go back to my story of my young man. So the young man has blown hot and cold for 5 days at a time because he has understood that the right thing to do is to eat salad, steamed vegetables, and fruit and cooked starches, whole starches. Well, that averages out to about 300 calories a pound. So you can imagine what this young man is thinking after about 5 days. He's ready to eat a pepperoni pizza all by himself, which is exactly what happens. Okay. So
Right.
instead, the idea is no, we are not trying to turn you into a saint that eats 300 calorie pound diet. We're turning you into a classic hunter-gatherer starch-based animal that is going to be aiming at 600 calories a pound. And if we do that, I'm not going to worry about the other things that you do. But I know that if I don't worry about you getting 3 pounds of starches, I know we're going to be filling up with the pepperoni pizza instead of filling up with rice, beans, and potatoes. Big difference. So if you eat some pepperoni pizza on top of it, you're not going to be eating that much pepperoni pizza. So let's go there for the next year and find out what happens to your weight. And if he'll do that, we'll wind up at 240 pounds or something, and then we'll be looking at the next phase at that point. Okay.
Right.
So hopefully that's a useful ideas for people.
So many years at the McDougall program, so many years at True North, and so many other places that you've worked in. Have you ever encountered a person that really did follow what you just explained, a very good way of eating, but there was an underlying condition, like maybe hypothyroidism, or maybe some kind of hormonal thing that they really needed to have checked, and in order to continue losing weight, and not because they weren't losing any and they really were following a clean diet?
Yeah, I only had one person that in 30 years that clearly was the genetic outlier. So this was a beautiful young lady, very smart, very beautiful, walked through my door, 5'4" and 360 pounds. And, and obviously the family tree betrayed this way outlying genes. And this young lady then started to eat a very disciplined McDougall maximum weight loss diet, and got down to about 240 pounds. So that's where it stopped. That's where she reached equilibrium. Then an unusual person decided that she would then at that point measure out her starches very, very fastidiously. So she was aiming to undereat by a couple hundred calories a day, knowing full well that she's still walking around with an extra 80 pounds on her. And so she fastidiously then did this and got all the way down to 160 pounds, which was, you're talking about incredible, diligent self-discipline over a couple of years. And then finally, actually, even at 5'4", 160, she could tell that she was still substantially overweight, because you could finally start to see the underlying genetic structure, and you start realizing, well, actually, ideal would be 125. Okay. And at that point, as one can imagine on such an odyssey like this, she was like, the hell with this. and how could anyone on earth argue with this reaction? So so she tossed the whole thing, and I think went back to essentially a healthy-ish McDougall thing, and wound up at 250 pounds and said that such is life. Okay, fair enough. So I have witnessed. I don't need to take anybody's word for it. In other words, anybody that tells me, "Oh no, I do everything perfectly." I've had a lot of people like that then later on told me that they didn't do it perfectly, and that when they really pinned their ears back, they started losing a bunch of weight. So I had one of those that came good maybe after 15 years. So I think I was probably working with a young woman in the early 2000s, and swore up and down, and yeah, I was deeply suspicious. I'm always deeply suspicious because I have exactly one exception. I work at a place that has between the McDougall and True North probably went through 1,500 patients a year. So for 20 years, that's 30,000 people. I've seen an awful lot of stories, and I've seen an awful lot of change. And so I'm not saying that these outlying conditions might be as common as 1 in 1,000, but they're not as common as 1 in 100. So almost anybody that I'm talking to that thinks that they're one of those people, you are not. So I did see the 1 in 30,000. I saw it with my own eyes, and I watched and worked with this young lady for years. And so I actually witnessed extraordinary changes that took place very, very subtly as a result of daily incredible diligence. Okay. So I saw that there was a genetic limit to that nervous system. And quite frankly, that's a nervous system that was clearly designed with enough genes to survive a tremendous famine, which is undoubtedly where those genes came from. Okay, so that's how that works. So somebody has to be LeBron James, the only man alive that is 270 pounds that could jump 42 inches off the ground. Somebody has to be the one that is way out there. Okay. Mm-hmm. And my client was one of those extremely rare people. There are others. There's literally very odd genetic individuals that can become 600 pounds and so forth. That was not her, but she was certainly a 1 in 5,000, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 3,000. In other words, an extremely rare genetic specimen. And there are people, and you will hit the limit. Yeah. Now, certainly, there could be thyroid conditions. It's worth looking at. If you're doing a really good job and you're carrying around an extra 40 pounds, have your thyroid checked. It is probably fine. And we probably have an interaction between genes and maybe a lack of activity and possibly a little bit of tweaking that could be done with the calorie density of your diet that would change things and take you down to 20 pounds overweight. So, but if you're sitting substantially high and you feel like you're doing everything really well, it's always worth looking at a thyroid.
Right. Okay.
Almost all insomnia has to do with actually almost all solvable problems of any kind, Gustavo, have to do with a mismatch between the Stone Age environment and the person's current circumstances. So if a person is overweight, that is because you are not living in a Stone Age environment. If you lived in a Stone Age environment, you would eat no processed foods whatsoever, and you would exercise vigorously every day, and therefore you would have no excess weight on you. Period. End of subject. Okay. So keep that in mind. Almost all any extended depression is not going to be typical of the species in in a Stone Age environment. In a Stone Age environment, you're waking up with the same 30 or 40 people, and you are important. You have market value to your activity all day long. And your job is to figure out what you can do that's most productive for the village. And so, not to be a nice person, but in order to put yourself in a position to trade most effectively for whatever it is that they are procuring as well. And so you also hang out with the most important people in your life to you. There are not a bunch of people in the nearby town that you haven't kept in contact with, that you'd really rather hang out with. There is no nearby town, and there is no, this is it. These are the people. This is your existence. And the sum total of their talent and abilities is the sum total of capability that stands between you and death. So nobody could be more important. And your relationships are extremely important. And this doesn't mean that there isn't squabbling and backstabbing and status snipping and et cetera. Of course there is. But there is also the best friends that you have. Okay? And so therefore there is nothing more important than seeing to it that you are liked and loved and you are contributing to your village. Okay? So therefore, people are not typically depressed for very long. Depression is a short-term reaction to a temporary loss relative to what we thought we were going to get. And it's going to turn out that the nervous system absorbs such blows as it does constantly. In other words, it's designed to, and then it's designed to then be focused on how it is that we can improve our circumstances optimally and start taking the actions to do that. Those actions are generally effective. In other words, you can generally plot what the best move is, even though you may not like what the circumstances are. You can plant that the best move, and as you start taking action towards the best move to execute on it, your mood is lifting. Okay, so depression, we now have beautiful proof that has now been published in a major psychiatric journal this summer that says that serotonin doesn't have anything to do with depression. It's got nothing to do with it. This was a total scam from the word go in order to addict hundreds of millions of people to antidepressant drugs, as if the cause of your depression was a serotonin deficiency. Cause of your depression is not a serotonin deficiency. It's a lack of productive connectivity to other people in a Stone Age village. That's the cause of depression. Okay? So we look at our lives and we see that almost all avoidable health problems are going to be the result of having a mismatch between our Stone Age health, our Stone Age circumstances, and our modern environment. That's going to be true for insomnia. So anybody that says, oh gosh, I'm an insomniac, really? Tell you what, let's you and I go camping, okay? We're going to go camping for 2 weeks. Don't bring your cell phone. Okay, we'll bring a compass. We got a map. We know where we are, okay? We're just half a mile down that road is the road where you'll hear a car go by every now and then. But otherwise, we're tucked back here by a river, and there's some other people around, so we can hear the kind of neat talk in the woods. We can hear their voices and so forth, and they're friendly. Okay, so we're not going to die. And we've got our tent or our camper or whatever it is, and no television, no screens. Okay, and now we're going to fix our food and look at the river and take a little hike and go up to the little peak up there. Let's just do that, and boy, does it get late early. It's late very early, okay? And we're going to let all that melatonin just soak right into your skull as that sun's going down over the mountains, okay? And by 10 o'clock, it's like you aren't anywhere near awake by 10 o'clock. And then remember what we're going to do. We're going to hike to that upper lake tomorrow to just look at the fish. I.e., we're going to do the amount of work that you would have done in the Stone Age physically. We're going to do that. That's going to be a 2.5 hour a 3 hour hike, an hour and a half up and an hour and a half back. By the time we do that, we skim a few rocks and chop a little bit of wood and light a fire again and have our food. No, you're ready for bed. And then it's going to turn out this miraculously thing happens. Within days, you're like out like a light, within an hour of sunset. There's no insomnia. But you put little people in circumstances where they're not sleeping around other people. There's no community noise. There's been no community connection. They haven't had a bunch of feedback all day long that they're a valued member of the village and that everything is secure and everybody's settled in for the nighttime. You're not hearing the voices of people murmuring around the campfire that are the late crowd that's going to stay up late because they're genetically built that way to stay up later. And then I'm an early bird and I go to bed earlier. But I can hear them murmuring so that I know that we're all safe. I haven't worked out all day long. I haven't worked on my body physically. Like all of those elements. And you look at that and you're like, really? What elements do you have to do in order to get rid of the insomnia? It's like, well, I don't know. Sometimes all I have to do is have people turn on a TV set in the other room when they go to bed, and that murmuring is enough to calm down their anxiety, get them to sleep. Okay. Other people, no, they need to work out for an hour a day, half an hour twice. Need to go on a treadmill and walk, even though that's an awful way to have to do it. Way better to be walking out in nature and doing it. The other people, they're worrying and worrying and worrying. Why? Possibly a lack of connection. Okay, because they actually haven't been embedded in a social group where they've been valuable for the last 14 hours waking. Okay, so what do we do about that? Not sure. Okay, maybe that person needs to be going to an evening church service at night, and that's going to calm down that nervous system and make them feel like they're a member of a community. I don't know what the solution is, but I do know that insomnia is not a natural problem, and it is as a result of a mismatch between the modern world and the person's current circumstances. So we start looking at changing what it is that we need to see to put the problem to bed. You said insomnia, constipation. The one problem is that sometimes people because they had some constipation problems, they will use a lot of, they will have a history of use of assistant, laxatives and so forth. And as a result, they may have done some damage, or they've created a sluggishness in the response of some of the muscles in the bowel. So usually what's necessary, I mean, this is a place to be, consulting. If a few of your people, if they have something like this, they should be talking to a guy like Dr. Peter Sultana at True North, who's an outstanding physician, and get a phone consult with him. But usually, what's necessary is a removal of any of those assisting mechanisms. Sometimes people are using enemas. They have done some things to basically disturb the integrity of that bowel function. And so sometimes we have to kind of reboot the system and start from scratch. And that is, often what's necessary. So usually that can be fixed with the right moves. There may be times when it can't be. I think I've run into a situation where as a result of an awful long history of all kinds of medical complications and medication use, I believe that there was probably some degree of permanent damage to that system. And once in a while, people have some genetic oddities in there. So you can have things like that happen, but that is not a typical problem for a non-damaged or intact bowel system. And so usually there is a fix. The people that are on the other side of this, I wouldn't be too worried about their health because there is not it isn't as if it's typical for people to, if they're a conventional eater, to die at 50. So in the United States, a conventional eater will only live about 3.6 years less than a very healthy eater. So these people's, so your relatives are not courting death; they are courting later life dysfunction, and so we're setting an example for them about that there's something that can be done about it, and they're getting to watch that, and so that they are not uninformed. That's fine. That's as good as we can do. So then when it comes to the fact that they're trying to shove junk in your face, that isn't because they don't love you. It's because they have a very complicated cost benefit analysis that's going on inside their mind, that they really don't believe that it makes very much difference. And they don't know what it is that I know, which is that yes, it's only 3.5 years difference in life expectancy, which is not nothing, but it's 10 or 15 or 20 years of dysfunction. Well, that they don't know. So as a result of that, they are not really believing that they are going to pay any significant costs for what is it they're doing, and they don't believe that you would pay any significant cost to join them. And as a result, they're also embarrassed and they feel shamed by when we do not follow along with them, and we are essentially advertising that we believe that there's a superior way of living. And they are a little bit bitter and resentful and frustrated that we are signaling that message. And so as a result, they can get a little bit militant and shitty about it. Okay, so that is actually the problem. The problem is one of embarrassment, not quite really believing it, and also but feeling that we are grandstanding a moral superiority, and that is uncomfortable. So what we want to do is we want to extricate ourselves from this. And I just thought of a scheme that I would have never thought of had you not asked me this question. You know, one of the stupidest books ever written in health, it's called Eat Right for Your Type by Dietary. I mean, from those of us that know anything about science, this thing is total 100% pseudoscience. It's the idea of, well, if your genes come from Europe, then you should be eating, milk and cheese because that your ancestors ate that. But if it came from Africa, you should eat this. And if it came from Asia, you should eat that. It's like, it's completely ridiculous. However, it makes superficial sense to people. Okay. And as a result of that, it actually can sell a concept. And the concept is, gee, we're all different. And therefore, what works for one person might not work for somebody else. Now, that is actually a very powerful concept. So a useful thing for some little person to utilize would be to say, hey, listen, I talked to Dr. Schmo, and they ran some allergy testing on me. God knows you could have some vegan doctor somewhere do it, or some mail-in thing. And it says, gee, you would be better off with the diet that has XYZ and not, ABC. And you could say, oh, you actually have this group and that you listen to, and the doctor there said that if you had this or that kind of a problem, then you're probably the type of person, like if you had a stent in you and you had a heart attack 8 years ago, then you're probably the type of person who will do better on traditional Latin America fare which is rice and beans, than you would on, for example, normal Italian fare, which is wheat with pasta. Okay, so and that the animal food should be minimal. Okay, so because that the traditional Latin America actually, in the recent centuries, it had a higher amount of animal, but previously they know that it had much less, and that when they've gone into the Indian villages, they see very low amounts of animal food. So that rice and beans is the main thing, and corn are the three main things that are being eaten. Now, so the idea here is that we say this is a very long, complicated discussion, which actually needs to be simple, which is the notion that, well, this group and this doctor says that probably just looking at me and hearing my situation, that I probably would be better off with the traditional Latin America, Central Latin America fare, which is going to be rice, beans, and corn. Okay. And he says that I can have some animal food, but not very much. Okay. So we don't pound the vegan drum, because that's a bridge too far conceptually for anybody. So we say, yeah. And what he says is that I should stay away from milk products because that's not a good thing. And I should kind of minimize my wheat products because, if I add more Italian blood in me, I might be better off with the wheat than I am with the rice and beans and corn. But because it looks like I'm probably where my ancestors came from, probably I'm better off balancing this more about rice, beans, and corn. Okay, so we tell a story that makes us a member of some little group of a group of people about how they ought to do things. Okay, and so that way, when we are not saying there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it, and I do it the right way and you do it the wrong way, and we're going to argue about this till I'm dead. That's the problem that we're in now. Instead, we want to be saying, no, actually, I'm a member of this little essentially genetic group. And the doc says that this genetic group has these characteristics. So I really I need to look out for wheat because that's not the greatest thing for me. What that's not going to offend anybody. Okay. And then I should really also, it's probably not good for me. If I was Italian, then the pizza would be fine with the wheat and the cheese on there. But apparently those two things are not so good for me. Now, what I'm good at is rice, beans, and corn. So tortillas and things like that, and to have polenta, I can have stuff like that. Those are the things that are really good for me. And burritos. And if I make tacos, I should have not very much meat in them, but it should be more rice and beans and lettuce and guacamole and things like that. Okay. So we talk about what we are and what we're not, but we don't talk about healthy and unhealthy. That's how we put as much smoke in the air as possible so they can't see what we're really thinking and what we're actually aiming at. That's probably the best way to keep the most peace possible.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
What I call generally, Gustavo, I call it the octopus strategy. And that is that if we put enough ink in the water, they can't quite see where we are.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
Very, very clever. Yes. Very good. Very good. Thank you. Well, just give us a 1 minute or second, a few seconds about the new book. When is it coming out?
The new book. We had leaked a core concept of the new book, which is this book is not about health. This book is about life, much larger than that. And it's essentially the story of human nature and human life satisfaction and happiness. And so, as you can tell, that Carl Rogers, 80 years ago once said that people a lot of times have just one good idea, and that their entire
Mhm.
career is nothing other than a permutation of those ideas. That's actually really interesting because when I look at the people that I admire, there's a lot of truth in that. So Allen's was about water fasting and diet, and John McDougall was all about a starch centered diet, and Colin Campbell, is about how nutrition can't be essentially defined by all the little constituent tiny parts to it. It needs to be a holistic overall thing. And Dr. Esselstyn's all about cardiovascular disease. It's actually interesting to watch that concept and
Yeah.
see how, and Chef AJ is all about, getting these rigid lines in place and defending them with your life. It's kind of interesting. And
Yeah.
for me, mine has been about the shift of human nature. In other words, I mean, our human nature has stayed the same, but our environment has changed under our feet, and all of the consequences that have resulted from that. And so,
Mhm.
when I've looked at all these health problems, I've looked at it through the lens of those are not natural problems if we went back 25,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay. And so I look at drug addiction that way. We go back 25,000 years, we're not going to see a single drug addict. So when you start looking at that, you start realizing, wait a minute, where does it stop? How many of the problems that
Yeah.
trouble people today, one after the next, we're going to look down through this and we're going to see that, if we eliminated all of the drug addiction in the world, think about that, Gustavo. Holy Moses, what a change that would be. What if we eliminated all of the obesity in the world and got rid of that? Whoa. What if we eliminated all of the cardiovascular disease in the world? Because the amount of animal food relative to the amount of unprocessed plant food and the physical effort on our part of people, we would have no vascular disease, even with some animal food in the diet. And we eliminate 80% of the cancer, which is what would happen. It's like, well, what problems do we have left? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, what about all the medications for depression and anxiety and insomnia? It's like, well, I think they're all gone. I think you're waking up in the middle of a Stone Age village and going to sleep with your best friends and your most important rivals and your most important people that you're wanting to shack up with. It's like, that's your life. And then you got your kids and you're trying to, you're working with them. It's like, okay. And it's like, well, why aren't we back there? The answer is, well, you don't want to scratch in the dirt all day long just to get enough calories, for goodness sakes. But people trying to get themselves to the gym to get into shape. You didn't try to get yourself to the gym to get into shape. You look at all the little old people that have a hard time walking around and have a thing around their neck in case they fall, they can't get up. Little old people don't fall and can't get up. They're incredibly capable of getting up off the ground because they don't sit in chairs. So when you start to look at and then you got all the young people that are basically addicted to video games, staring at screens all day, not being very productive and just kind of sluggish and sullen with their parents. And it's like, wow, if you take this concept and take it on out as far as it goes, in all of the human problems that you see, what are we going to find? And what we're going to find is the long-ranging discussion of this book. It's about the nature of human life and how I approach the problems that people have today from this particular lens. So it's really the same lens as I started with the pleasure trap, but it has now been extended out into all avenues of human life.
Right. Right.
So that's the story.
And you and Dr. Jen Hawkes you both are writing it, correct?
Yes. So Jen Hawk is my co-author, a spectacular talent, and
She really is spectacular. Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So yeah, you can hear us in our discussion of these types of things on the Beat Your Genes podcast.
Yes, yes. And you and her, are you still offering one-on-one consultations online or on phone, things like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you go
People
to
can
You can find her. You can find me at the website. You can find her through our website too at esteemdynamics.com if people
Okay,
would like to talk to us.
very good. I'm putting the website here.
Yes.
Well, great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This has been a master class. It's wonderful. I appreciate that very much.
Fantastic. It is always so good to see your face. And we should do this more often.
Yeah, yeah, we always have
You're
a
just a joy
time.
to humanity. You know?
Oh, thank you. That was very sweet. Thank you, Dr. Lyle. And thank everybody for coming and learning. There's no end to learning. Thank
Okay.
you. Have a wonderful Sunday, everyone. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye, folks.
Bye.